The first warning sign was not the security officer giving me that tight-lipped, apologetic nod like I was walking into my own memorial service. It was not even my magnetic access badge buzzing red and refusing to unlock the glass double doors of the scientific research wing. No, the real blow came when I bypassed the electronic lock, using my supervisor override keycard, pushed open the heavy oak door to my laboratory, and saw a complete stranger sitting in my ergonomic executive chair. He had his polished leather shoes kicked up on my custom mahogany desk, casually sipping espresso from a white ceramic mug that had World Bed Innovator printed across the front. I had not even crossed the threshold when he looked up from his tablet, grinned like a hyena on synthetic caffeine, and declared with supreme confidence, "You must be Matthew. I am Jared Sinclair, the new Director of Molecular Innovation, the new Director of Molecular Innovation." I stood there in my tailored white lab coat, blinking once, then twice, letting the full absurdity of the situation sink into my mind. 3 months ago, I was running this entire research division. My name was etched on the frosted glass entryway door, stamped across 8 federal patent applications, and printed on every primary grant allocation document that kept Helix Biotech afloat when our second venture capital round was drying up on Sand Hill Road. I was 48 years old, a senior molecular biologist who had poured 6 long years of 80-hour workweeks, 2 missed family anniversaries, and dozens of sleepless nights into this sterile concrete bunker of pipettes, bioreactors, and high-resolution mass spectrometers. I had personally assembled every experimental protocol, calibrated every centrifuge, and recruited every junior technician in this facility when the company was just 3 people, working in a rented basement laboratory in downtown San Diego. And now Jared, a 32-year-old corporate climber wearing an ill-fitting designer jacket and suffocating cologne, was sitting at my desk as if he had owned the facility since its founding day. He stood up slowly with exaggerated, theatrical pity, reaching into my middle desk drawer to pull out a thick manila envelope. Human Resources wanted to handle this transition through the standard formal exit channels, Jared said smoothly, sliding a single printed document across the polished desk surface, but I figured it would be far more efficient if we handled it man to man. Welcome back from your trial deployment, Matthew. Consider yourself replaced effective immediately. Inside the envelope were my formal termination papers. The signature lines were clearly marked in red ink, and the severance clause was pre-filled with the kind of insulting, lowball financial figure corporate lawyers offer someone they assume is too demoralized or exhausted to fight back. They were offering me 3 months of base salary in exchange for signing a blanket waiver of all future legal claims against Helix Biotech. I looked Jared straight in the eyes without flinching. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam my leather clipboard onto the desk or throw my white coat onto the floor. I simply took a cheap black ballpoint pen from the holder on the desk, walked past Jared without making eye contact, and stepped out to the security counter in the main lobby. Instead of signing the exit release form, I signed my name on the daily visitor entry log on the counter, marking the exact minute of my departure. I handed the pen back to the security guard and asked calmly if I needed an official security escort to leave the premises. The guard looked down at his polished boots, visibly uncomfortable and unable to meet my gaze, and pressed the release button to buzz me through the heavy glass doors. I walked out into the bright California sunlight, carrying a small cardboard box containing my personal reference books, framed scientific awards, and family photos that felt heavier than a lead vault. I drove home to my apartment in La Jolla, taking the scenic coastal route along Torrey Pines Road as the cool ocean breeze blew through my open car window. Looking out at the golden cliffs and crashing Pacific waves, I remembered how much sacrifice had gone into building that laboratory from nothing. That manila envelope rested on the passenger seat like a toxic package. I did not shed a single tear. I did not call my former lab team to complain about corporate disloyalty or executive greed. I simply walked inside, poured myself a double scotch the color of dark amber, and walked over to the built-in filing cabinet, tucked under my wireless router station. I pulled out the original hard copy of my employment contract from 6 years ago, bound in blue cardstock and secured with heavy brass fasteners. I turned straight to Claus, 9.3, a concise paragraph buried between routine vacation accrual policies and standard non-disclosure agreements. It was a single, surgical sentence I had personally fought to insert during my initial onboarding, back when the founding executives were desperate for my scientific expertise, and I possessed all the technical leverage. The clause read clearly: all research, synthetic nucleic acid vector architectures, and patentable work shall remain the sole property of the originating party unless explicitly transferred through an executed federal assignment document. I read this sentence once, then twice, listening to the ice cubes melt slowly in my crystal glass. There were no transfer documents, not 6 years ago, not last month, not today. I had not merely originated the research, I was the foundational science of Helix Biotech. Every line of genetic sequencing code, every proprietary viral vector formulation, every preclinical trial notebook, and every patent application bore my signature, Dr. Matthew Miller, as the sole inventor. 8 filings in total, submitted directly to the United States Patent and Trademark Office, and not a single one possessed an executed reassignment of ownership to Helix Biotech. I took a slow sip of scotch and let out a long, quiet breath. Jared Sinclair was currently walking around the corporate office, printing new glossy business cards and pretending to understand the mechanics of synthetic messenger RNA, completely oblivious to the reality that he had just ousted the one person holding the keys to the entire corporate kingdom. I was not going to storm the executive suite or make a public scene. I was going to let them march straight into the fire, smiling and holding their own gasoline cans. The corporate game had not ended when I walked out of the building. It had only just begun, and that night I did not sleep a single minute. I sat at my kitchen counter as the streetlights outside flickered against the blinds, surrounded by 6 years of archived laboratory documentation, patent filings, and corporate correspondence. The termination papers lay flat on the kitchen table like a bad hand of cards, but beside them sat the pristine filing receipts from the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Clause 9.3 was so understated on paper, a dry legal construct tucked away between clauses on sick leave policies and corporate computer usage rules. But I remembered every single word spoken during the intense contract negotiations 6 years ago. I was a 42-year-old molecular biologist back then, holding a fresh doctorate from a top research university and possessing a revolutionary scientific breakthrough in targeted synthetic RNA delivery. Helix Biotech was little more than a struggling startup with 2 empty laboratory benches, a mountain of debt, and grand venture capital ambition. They needed speed to satisfy early angel investors, and I needed absolute legal protection for my life work. When their founding corporate attorney handed me a boilerplate employment contract claiming total assignment of all future discoveries, I slid it right back across the mahogany conference table. I told them straight that if this startup went bankrupt or got acquired by a pharmaceutical giant, my name stayed on what I built. They grumbled about standard corporate procedure, but when I packed my briefcase to leave the building, they signed Clause 9.3 without another word. Back in the present, I began digging deep into public financial databases, federal patent registries, and corporate filings. I logged into LinkedIn and searched for the official page of Helix Biotech. There was not a single mention of my departure or my 6 years of foundational service. Instead, there was a flashy media release, boasting about leadership transformation and next-generation pipeline expansion under Jared Sinclair. Every quote from Jared sounded like it had been generated by an artificial intelligence program fed on corporate buzzwords and venture capital jargon. He spoke grandly about disruptive frontiers, bioharmony, and technical synergy as if he had personally assembled every nucleotide with his bare hands. Then I clicked on their latest financial press release and felt my pulse quicken. Helix Biotech was preparing to close a Series C funding round of $55 million from major institutional venture capital syndicates in Boston and New York. $55 million, based entirely on a biotech platform whose underlying intellectual property had never been legally assigned to the company, whose foundational patents were still registered exclusively under my personal name in the federal patent database. This was no longer just executive arrogance or poor management decision-making. It was massive corporate identity theft and federal securities fraud, and it handed me absolute legal leverage. Under Title 35 of the United States Code, Section 261, federal patent ownership remains strictly with the individual inventor unless a written transfer instrument is executed and recorded with the Federal Patent Office. Helix Biotech possessed zero assignment documents on record. Furthermore, under Title 35, Section 283, a federal judge could grant an immediate injunction freezing all commercial activity touching unassigned patents. The adrenaline did not hit me like a sudden shock. It settled in like a cold, steady clarity. I reached for my phone and dialed a private contact number I had not called in 3 years. Catherine Thorne answered on the fourth ring. Catherine was a premier intellectual property litigation attorney at Thorne and Partners in downtown Los Angeles, a sharp legal mind who specialized in high-stakes technology ownership disputes and corporate fraud cases. "Catherine, it is Matthew Miller," I said calmly. "Are you still handling complex intellectual property litigation?" There was a brief pause on the line before Catherine replied, her voice warming with genuine interest. "Matthew? I thought you were locked away in a laboratory building a biotech empire down in San Diego." I smiled into the receiver. "I took a brief sabbatical," I said. "But I am back now, and I have a case file you will want to inspect immediately." We met the following morning at a quiet, classic diner near the federal courthouse in Los Angeles. I slid a heavy leather binder across the polished wooden table. Catherine opened it, pulling out a neon yellow highlighter from her purse as her sharp eyes darted methodically from Clause 9.3 to the patent application numbers, the USPTO filing timestamps, and the highlighted messages from company executives acknowledging my sole authorship. She drew a thick yellow line beneath Clause 9.3 and looked up at me with a dangerous smile. "You kept every single original filing receipt, lab notebook scan, and patent confirmation?" Catherine asked, raising an eyebrow in genuine admiration. "I never throw away legal leverage," I replied, taking a sip of black coffee. She leaned back in her booth seat, holding her coffee cup, staring at the highlighted contract line like I had just handed her a live grenade with the safety pin pulled. "This clause is rock solid, Matthew," she said quietly. "Helix Biotech has committed a monumental legal oversight. They did not just fail to execute an assignment document. They built their entire company valuation on intellectual property they legally do not own." We did not celebrate or exchange enthusiastic high fives. We simply sat across from each other, mapping out the precise timeline for maximum legal impact. Under federal securities law, specifically Securities and Exchange Commission, Rule 10b-5, pitching unassigned intellectual property to venture capital funds constitutes material misrepresentation and federal fraud. Furthermore, their abrupt termination of my executive position violated the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, known as the Warren Act, which mandates 60 days written notice for key executive reorganizations and mass layoffs. Catherine smiled thin and cold. "We let them keep marching," she advised. "The higher they climb on that $55 million pitch, the harder they will crash when the truth comes out." And for the next 3 weeks, I operated like a silent ghost in the corporate machine. I created a secure, anonymous email account and subscribed to every venture capital newsletter, biotech industry journal, and SEC disclosure feed. I set up automated search alerts for keywords that would make any corporate compliance officer break out in a cold sweat. Helix Biotech, Series C funding round, synthetic RNA platform, Jared Sinclair, and my own name, Dr. Matthew Miller. Every morning, my inbox filled with industry updates. Helix Biotech was riding high on aggressive publicity. An industry portal announced that Jared Sinclair and CEO Charles Thornton were scheduled to deliver the keynote presentation at the annual Biotech West Summit in San Francisco on July 14th. The keynote address was titled "Revolutionizing Messenger RNA Delivery, the Sinclair Cascade Model." They were not just using my science. They were actively rebranding my lab work, slapping Jared's name on my viral vector delivery charts, and claiming my efficacy metrics as his personal breakthroughs. They had not even bothered to alter the graphic layouts or remove my original lab notebook control numbers from the slide footers. It was blatant intellectual property theft masquerading as corporate innovation. Rather than firing off an angry email or making a premature legal move, I reached out to Rachel Cooper using an encrypted messaging application on Signal. Rachel had been my lead lab manager for 4 years, a brilliant researcher who had been demoted to compliance assistant during Jared's recent corporate shakeup. She responded to my message within seconds. "Matthew," Rachel wrote back frantically, "everyone in the laboratory was told you took a voluntary retirement package with a massive payout." I let out a cold, cynical laugh. "Jared told the scientific staff I retired?" "Yes," Rachel replied. "He claimed you wanted to pursue personal research interests." "Matthew, they are presenting your exact vector delivery data at the July summit. Jared is taking total credit for the entire platform, even though he cannot even explain basic polymer chain reactions to the junior research staff. Yesterday, he tried to lead a technical briefing and ended up reading straight off your old slide notes, word for word, because he did not understand the underlying biochemistry. Can you confirm if they executed any post-termination assignment paperwork in HR?" I asked. "None whatsoever," Rachel confirmed immediately. "Legal asked HR for your executive file last week, but the assignment tab was completely blank. The HR manager went pale when she realized there was no signed form PTO 1595 attached. Everyone had simply assumed the documentation was filed in the corporate vault years ago. That was the final piece of evidence we needed. On June 28th, Catherine Thorne prepared a formal administrative inquiry regarding patent status and sent it directly to Helix Biotech in-house legal team. It was a polite, neutral letter asking for written clarification on licensing terms and commercial royalty schedules for Dr. Matthew Miller, registered patents. 24 hours later, Helix Biotech Corporate Counsel sent back a cold, dismissive 2-sentence reply. At this time, Helix Biotech considers all contractual and financial obligations to Dr. Miller fully satisfied under his severance terms. Have a pleasant day. They thought that was the end of it. They assumed I was just another disgruntled former employee rattling an empty saber. They had no idea that Catherine had already prepared a second, far more surgical package. Instead of filing a public lawsuit right away, which would have allowed Helix Biotech legal team to stall in state court for months while continuing to collect investor funds, Catherine sent a confidential disclosure packet directly to the lead external auditing firm handling due diligence for the Series C venture capital syndicate. The packet contained a certified copy of my original employment agreement, with Clause 9.3 highlighted in bright yellow, the 8 USPTO patent registration certificates, listing Matthew Miller as sole owner, an official confirmation from the Federal Patent Registry showing 0 executed Form PTO 1595 assignment documents on record. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. External due diligence auditors are like bloodhounds trained to hunt corporate liability and fraud. The moment the lead auditors cross-referenced my patent numbers with the federal database, the alarm bells went off across 3 major financial auditing firms. At 2 o'clock in the morning on July 5th, the General Counsel of Helix Biotech received an emergency audit query from the lead investor legal team. Please provide immediate verification of patent assignment. Form PTO 1595 for core platform patents listed under Dr. Matthew Miller. Panic erupted inside Helix Biotech corporate headquarters in San Diego. The General Counsel frantically tried to reach CEO Charles Thornton, who was currently sipping expensive vintage wine on a luxury yacht off the Amalfi Coast. When Charles finally opened the audit query email on his satellite phone, the subject header said everything: critical intellectual property defect, potential total lack of patent ownership for Series C assets. By sunrise, the executive team realized they had built a $55 million house of cards on a foundation they did not own. And worse, they had broadcasted that house of cards to every major venture capital fund in the biotech sector. The trap had officially sprung. And the emergency board of directors meeting was convened at exactly 8 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time via a secure video conference link. I joined the call from the main conference room of Thorne and Partners in downtown Los Angeles. My camera was switched off, my microphone was muted, and my leather binder lay open beside me like a loaded weapon. Catherine sat to my right, sipping iced herbal tea with the calm, relaxed posture of a grandmaster chess player who already knows the outcome in 10 moves. The video screen filled with nervous, sweat-stained faces. Board chair Elizabeth Barrett looked pale and rigid in her silk blazer. CEO Charles Thornton was logged in from his hotel suite in Italy, looking disheveled, 30 pounds heavier, and visibly shaken. Jared Sinclair was present on audio only, silent as a ghost in the background. "Thank you all for joining on such short notice," Board Chair Elizabeth Barrett began, her voice tight and clipped. "We have an urgent matter regarding our Series C due diligence process that requires immediate resolution. I will let external IEP counsel explain the situation to the board." External counsel cleared her throat loudly, adjusting her glasses as she looked over her documents. "During our final verification audit for the Series C closing documents, lead investors raised a critical legal defect regarding the ownership structure of our core messenger RNA delivery platform. Specifically, all 8 foundational patents powering the Helix vector pipeline list Dr. Matthew Miller as the sole inventor and registered owner." Charles Thornton leaned violently toward his camera, his face turning bright red. "That is an absurd administrative oversight." Charles barked nervously. "Matthew was a paid employee. Everything he created belongs to Helix Biotech under standard employment norms." External counsel shook her head slowly, her expression grave. "Not according to his original contract, Charles. Allow me to read Clause 9.3 of Dr. Miller Onboarding Agreement. All research, synthetic nuclear-acid vector architectures, and patentable work shall remain the sole property of the originating party unless explicitly transferred through an executed federal assignment document." A suffocating silence descended upon the virtual conference room. You could practically hear the collective panic rising through the digital fiber optic lines. A senior venture capital representative on the board interjected forcefully, demanding to know why the executive team had certified complete patent ownership in their Series C disclosures when no executed assignment existed. "Are there any executed assignment documents on file anywhere in our records?" Elizabeth Barrett asked, her voice dangerously quiet. External counsel looked down at her desk. "No. No Form PTO 1595 was ever executed or filed with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Legally speaking, Dr. Matthew Miller owns 100% of the platform. Helix Biotech owns 0%. "My goodness," a senior board member gasped, clutching his chest. "Then what in heaven's name have we been pitching to institutional investors for the past 3 years?" That was the precise moment I unmuted my microphone. "The truth," I said clearly, my voice ringing steady and resonant through the speakers. "You were pitching my scientific breakthroughs. You just forgot to pay for them, and you forgot who owns them." Charles Thornton stared into his camera, his eyes wide with absolute desperation. "Matthew," Charles stammered, trying to adopt a warm, friendly tone that fooled no one. "Look, this is obviously a massive misunderstanding between old colleagues. We can fix this retroactively right now. We can adjust your severance package today to include a generous stock option grant and full executive consulting fees." Catherine Thorne leaned toward my microphone, her tone razor-sharp and authoritative. "Retroactive severance will not resolve this matter, Charles. What Helix Biotech is facing right now is federal patent infringement under Title 35 U.S.C. Section 271, Statutory Warrant Act violations under Title 29 U.S.C. Section 2101, and Securities and Exchange Commission, Rule 10b5 securities fraud for marketing unassigned assets to institutional investors. If my client chooses to file a federal injunction today under Title 35 Section 283, your Series C round will be frozen instantly, and federal regulators will open a formal criminal fraud investigation into your executive board." Elizabeth Barrett buried her face in her hands for a brief moment before looking up directly at Catherine Camera Square. "What are your client terms?" she asked bluntly. Then Catherine opened our term sheet. "Dr. Miller will not execute an assignment of ownership under any circumstances. However, he is willing to grant Helix Biotech a non-exclusive, 4-year commercial license for the platform. The license fee will be set at top market rates, indexed annually to the National Biotech Performance Index. with retroactive royalty payments due immediately for the past 3 years of unauthorized commercial use. Furthermore, all corporate marketing, patent filings, and investor decks must explicitly state, licensed under the Miller Protocol. Charles looked like he was about to faint on camera. That will cost us millions of dollars every single quarter, he shouted. Then I suggest you explain to your Series C investors why their $55 million round is canceled. Catherine replied coolly. The board chair did not hesitate for a second. Meeting adjourned for executive vote, Elizabeth declared. We will have an answer within 2 hours. The commercial licensing agreement was fully executed within 48 hours. The board of directors did not even attempt to negotiate the rate sheet or the royalty schedule. They knew the alternative was complete corporate destruction, criminal fraud investigations, and immediate collapse of their $55 million funding round. Helix Biotech was forced to wire millions of dollars in retroactive licensing royalties directly into my designated corporate bank account, alongside agreeing to steep annual licensing fees that guaranteed my complete financial independence for the rest of my life. On Thursday morning, Human Resources issued an internal company-wide announcement. There was no farewell party for Jared Sinclair, no celebratory post on LinkedIn, and no polite corporate memo wishing him success in future endeavors. Jared was quietly terminated without a severance package, escorted out of the building by the same security guard who had buzzed me out 3 weeks prior. He was seen loading his personal belongings into a cardboard box in the parking lot, red-faced, confused, and utterly defeated. I did not return to Helix Biotech as an employee. I had no desire to punch a time card or report to a board of directors ever again. Instead, I established Miller Bioworks LLC, a private intellectual property holding firm operating out of a modern office space overlooking the Pacific Ocean in La Jolla. My first official act was hiring Rachel Cooper as Vice President of Research Operations, offering her triple her previous salary and complete scientific freedom to lead independent molecular research. We immediately set up state-of-the-art laboratory benches and recruited top postdoctoral researchers who had grown disillusioned with corporate bureaucracy. Helix Biotech was no longer my employer. They were merely a vendor customer on my client ledger, required to pay monthly usage fees for every single experiment touching my patented platform. Under the strict terms of our licensing agreement, every quarterly development report, scientific publication, and investor pitch deck produced by Helix Biotech was legally mandated to feature the required attribution line in bold text, powered by the Miller Protocol. 2 weeks after the settlement was finalized, my private phone rang. It was CEO Charles Thornton calling from his personal mobile line late on a Friday evening. Matthew, Charles said, his voice sounding hollow, aged, and completely exhausted. Can we please speak off the record? Just man to man. I sat back in my executive leather office chair, watching the sun dip below the horizon over the ocean waves. I held the phone away from my ear for a moment, then spoke with quiet, unshakable authority. Charles, I said calmly, I no longer work for you, and I am not your colleague. All future communications regarding the Miller Protocol must be routed strictly through my legal counsel at Thorne and Partners. Before he could offer another desperate plea, I disconnected the call cleanly. The following month, Helix Biotech held its formal Series C closing presentation with lead investors. Because of the strict disclosure requirements imposed by our licensing agreement, Charles Thornton was forced to present the updated corporate structure to the board of directors and investor representatives. During the live video conference, an investor representative asked why the platform structure had been modified to include heavy external licensing fees. Charles looked directly into his camera, his face drained of all confidence, and whispered the line that would define his executive downfall. Dr. Miller owns every patent we have been pitching to investors for 3 years. The conference room fell dead silent. No one defended him. No one offered excuses. They all understood that the balance of power had permanently shifted. When the transcript of that board call was delivered to my desk the following afternoon, Rachel Cooper walked into my office with a smile, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. Look at them now, Rachel said, shaking her head in amusement. They thought they were firing a lab manager. and they ended up turning you into their landlord. I picked up my glass and looked out over the Pacific coastline. Funny, I said with a quiet smile. Jared Sinclair thought he was replacing me on day one. Turns out, I was the product all along. I set down my glass, opened a fresh digital file on my desktop, and titled it Miller Bioworks Expansion Phase 1. This was not just corporate revenge, it was justice, executed by the fine print.